else's time. So thank you very much.
So I'll go ahead and start. I'm Sue Ward, and I'm here with Jay Thomas to talk about a gamification prototype we tested both before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. First, I'll talk about the rationale for our research study and the various conditions, and then Jay will talk about our findings related to performance and engagement. This project has been a collaborative effort. The team includes subject matter experts in science, assessment design, and psychometrics. So why should we care about engagement in assessment? When performance on an assessment doesn't affect a student's grade, the student's level of concern may not be very high. They might rush through the activity or guess or leave questions unanswered. And this goes for learning tools as well. Also, if the activity is computer-based, students may not absorb the information as well. However, we know that online activities can promote access and availability, and as evidenced during the pandemic, they are sometimes necessary. So how can we increase engagement and performance? We know that interactivity can increase engagement because it involves learning by doing. Also, game elements and gamification have been shown to promote motivation. So with advances in technology, we have the capability to add interactivity and gamification to online assessments and learning tools, but how far do we need to go? We don't want to add anything unnecessary. To find out, we conducted a research study to learn the effects of interactivity and game elements on engagement and performance. We began by modifying an ACT Aspire exemplar on the topic of viscosity, and it was developed for upper middle and to early high school students. We rebuilt the assessment as a 16-question activity, and we created 4 variants. The first is a traditional multiple choice assessment, which we call the baseline or control. The second with interactive items. The third with the same interactive items and narrative components. And the fourth with the same interactive items and a point system. And except for the specific modifications of interactivity and game elements, all 4 variants had the same flow. Each began with an introduction to viscosity and presented 1 question at a time in a linear style, such that students were not able to revisit questions or change answers. So how do we change a question to be interactive? Let's look at a couple screenshots. On the left, we have the baseline variant. It looks very similar to a standard online Aspire test. There's a scrollable passage with a multiple choice question. Here, the question asks the student to interpolate. They need to determine where a new data point should appear on a graph, and they can choose from one of 4 options. This question could easily be modified to be interactive. On the right, we have the interactive variant. This time, instead of choosing between graphs, we ask the student to plot the point on the graph, to drag and drop to the correct place. Here's an example of how a science experiment can be simulated. It requires the student to be active as they click on each of the different liquids in the test tubes of different colors. Once they click on the button, the ball drops and they can observe the roll time and record it in the table. This simulation also included optional audio. This provides an opportunity to elicit skills beyond a traditional online assessment. It also provides an opportunity to complete an activity that may not be available in a lab setting due to limited access to equipment. So how do we add game elements? In the interactive plus narrative variant, we added a storyline with characters and dialogue. Here's a short video.
Wow, a time machine. Do you think it could actually work? No way. Time machines are science fiction. Or, I don't know. Maybe the person who built this car really is brilliant. Yeah, you're probably right. But who knows? Let's at least try to fix it.
And in the interactive plus points variant, we provided feedback on correct and incorrect answers with sound effects and stars for fast responses. Here's a short video. This is the same interpolation item we looked at earlier. The learner reads the instructions and places the point on the graph and then submits. At the end of each variant, we presented a survey. For user experience, we wanted to know which features the students liked and didn't like, and their overall satisfaction with the task. We included an open-ended question: what can we do to improve the things you didn't like? For engagement, we provided 4 statements derived from a full engagement scale. We tested the modules with middle school students in an initial pilot in the fall of 2018, which we call phase 1. And we identified several opportunities for further study. When we looked at the survey or at themes in the survey data, students found the baseline passage difficult to understand. They thought the interactive variants were too long, and some features in the narrative and points variants were too distracting, especially the audio. So with this in mind, we redesigned the modules for phase 2 testing. We minimized any content differences and we streamlined the format of the interactive variants. We also made the game elements less distracting and more positive. You can see the 2 screenshots of the updated game elements. We condensed the narrative variant and added more diverse characters, and we updated the points variant and leveled with a leveled badge award system. We removed the audio from all 4 variants. We then ran a small functionality test with 8th graders in the spring of 2019 and a second full test with 7th graders in the fall of 2021. And Jay will tell you more about that.
So given the technical test between phase 1 and phase 2, we lost a lot of data at the classroom level. So we decided that we would assign students to variants at the individual rather than the class level to better ensure that we could get a more balanced mix of data. This also prevented the funneling effects in a junior high where students in honors tracks and math or foreign language subjects get pushed into a single classroom period. Now, the FRL numbers here is likely representative of the numbers taken at the school level, since we tested all 7th grade classes. And we ended with approximately 250 students for both phases. Now we're going to look at performance. For both phases, all interactive variants led to better student performance in the baseline form. However, there was not a statistically significant difference between the 3 interactive forms with these samples. It is interesting to note that the phase 2 or post-COVID lockdown cohort did better on the baseline, although not quite significantly. The higher baseline scores in phase 2 did result in lower Cohen's d effect size for the phase 2 study. However, the more gamified versions in both phases had either moderate or high effect sizes. Now, let's look at engagement. Using the 5-point Likert scale, the average values were all positive for interest and experience in the pre-COVID lockdown results. The phase 2 results are interesting that the baseline has neutral or slightly negative results after the lockdown for interest, enjoyment, and recommend other students. In fact, interest levels are lower for all variants, and significantly so for the narrative. So it appears that the novelty of doing work on a computer in class may have worn off. Most interesting, given our focus on gamification, was that the points version was significantly higher in interest, enjoyment, and recommend to others. It was also significantly lower in self-reported effort. It is possible that students did not consider it hard effort or much effort, as the survey question had, when engaging in the game elements. The time to complete the lesson did not indicate that the students in the points variants did not engage with effort. They just perceived it to not be working hard in the most gamified variant. Now, first, we know that how a junior high student attended school during the pandemic was not strictly a student decision. Family concerns, such as whether or not a parent could be home during school hours, free breakfast and lunch for in-person attendance, and the presence of younger siblings are just a few aspects that impacted that decision. We found that 100% virtual students had the highest interest and effort and highest scores overall, and that those students who were in school in person for all 3 terms had the lower ratings all around. For the cross effect of variant type and mode of schooling during the 2020-21 school year, the small sample sizes for each variant did not achieve statistical significance. It is interesting that the baseline results of all online were the lowest, while that same group was the highest for both of the gamified variants. The more students do online learning, the more they get burned out by bad pedagogy. As a parent of a student who finished junior high in lockdown computer-based learning and was all remote for his freshman year, I can personally attest to this. Gamification and sound pedagogy for computer-based activities makes a big difference. Now, focusing on this item, I enjoyed doing computer activities and simulations more during the 2021 school year than I did before March 2020. Those who felt they enjoyed computers more during the COVID lockdowns than before report a higher levels of interest, enjoyment, and effort. And the efforts for performance, however, were mixed. Different question was, I learned better materials from computer activities and simulations now than I did in March 2020. So the learn now. The interesting thing here is that the students who believed that they learned better from computer activities now than they did before the pandemic shutdowns did actually show higher performance. Those who agreed with the statement, 3 or higher, showed higher performance across all variants. Now, in science education, there's a lot of research that has shown that the beginning in junior high, there's an achievement gap in science for female students, and that it begins to surface in junior high. In phase 1, we found no significant gender effects. However, in phase 2, we found that female students showed significantly greater gains with interactive and gamification elements. More importantly, they narrowed the gap so that female students scored approximately the same or better than boys on the 3 interactive versions. The effect size for females was larger with the more gamified variants. Interestingly, we asked about the amount of hours spent gaming in the new version and specifically included games on computers, phones, tablets, and consoles for the phase 2 questionnaire, as some recent research has shown that girls play more video games on phones and tablets than boys, and that many do not consider phone games the same as console games on questionnaires. So in phase 2, we found that boys and girls engaged in similar amount of gaming time in the phase 2 survey. When we did not include this clarification of video or computer games, boys reported more time spent playing computer games in phase 1. And thinking about the last presentation about equity, we really want to look at does gamification elements improve performance and reduce the gap for traditionally underserved populations in science. And for these purposes, underserved populations of color included students who identified as African American, Hispanic, 2 or more races, and Native American or Pacific Islander. The reference group is white and Asian students. Interactive elements improved the performance for underserved students, but it did not narrow the gap. The effect size was large for all modules. So whites and Asians had a very large effect size of better performance than our underserved group, regardless of the condition. So the underserved group showed improvement, but not enough to narrow the gap. So our overall conclusions were that performance improved for students and subgroups of students with interactive and game elements, which was good. And although underserved students' scores showed increases, the gap was not narrowed, which unfortunately was rather disappointing. And the phase 2 results showed a narrowing of the gender gap with interactive elements for females. The anomaly of no validity for the point version across scores is a surprising result. This means that whether you were a good student or a bad student in science did not correlate to how you performed on the points version. We did find a moderately significant correlation between scores in grades in phase 1 and performance on our assessment of these science practices. We did not find it in phase 2. However, it was done during the 3rd week of school. So almost all the students had A's because most of their grades had come from things like turning in their school rules, et cetera. And so there wasn't a whole lot of things going on there. At this point, if we have any time left, I'll open it up for questions.